Hey, Dan Lucchesi here with the Lucchesi Property Group, and it's about time I recorded this video. I've had this conversation 1,000 times, but I've never recorded a video about it to share it more publicly, and I think that this is a worthy educational piece for people to just understand and be, able to consider. Now, this does apply to Colorado. This is not every other state has a little bit different way that they handle these agency and client relationships between broker and client. So I can't, this is not meant to educate you on other states. This is for Colorado, but I'm going to read you some things and then give some commentary and explanation directly from a form that the state of Colorado uses. It's called the Definition of Working Relationships. This form has been superseded now with a buyer-specific disclosure and a seller-specific disclosure, but the agency relationships in this form totally still applicable. So a lot of times I hear people say, "Oh, I had my buyer's agent and my," and this often will come up when me or another realtor tries to have a conversation, and it's the right conversation about how to represent that buyer's best interest. So in Colorado, I'm going to jump to the bottom of this. It says verbatim, a separate written buyer agency agreement is required, which sets forth the duties and obligations of the broker and the buyer. That's for a buyer's agent. What that means is if you did not sign an agency agreement with your last realtor, they actually were not your buyer's agent. They were something else. They still were working with you, but they were not your agent. And here's why that matters conceptually. A buyer's agent works solely on behalf of the buyer to promote the interests of the buyer with the utmost good faith, loyalty, and fidelity. In other words, you are a fiduciary for the client. You are their agent. So the agent negotiates on behalf of and acts as an advocate for the buyer. The buyer's agent must disclose to sellers and the seller's broker adverse material facts about the buyer and their ability to perform, but that is like having, this is an analogy we've used many, many times in my business. It's like having a coach in a football game. The coach is there to make sure you win. They are your advocate. They want to see, they have a vested interest in who succeeds in the transaction. That's what an agent is, just to make it a simple concept. Again, you cannot have that in Colorado without a written buyer agency agreement. So this drives me nuts when I hear, like, I'm trying to do right by a buyer, for example, and I'm telling them, hey, I'm going to send over my agreement to make me your agent. And they might, most of them do appreciate it and understand and accept, but there's enough people that haven't had this conversation explained to them by prior realtors. And that's the sad part. It's not the buyer's fault, it's the realtor's fault who didn't have those conversations. And the buyer essentially goes, well, wait, my last agent didn't make me sign something. And they misunderstand and they think that the agreement is for my benefit. The state of Colorado writes the buyer agency agreement, I would say 90% in the benefit of the buyer. It is there to protect you and make you, the buyer, or the seller, same thing, make you aware of how you are being protected and how you must be represented by your realtor. And it makes it it puts the realtor in a fiduciary responsibility and makes it a binding agreement. They have now a legal duty to represent your best interest. So that is huge. And it's such an injustice when another realtor never even took the time to explain it and kind of misrepresented and allowed this buyer to think that they had an agent when actually all they had was what's called a transaction broker. So I'll get to that in just a second because I want you guys to understand what a transaction broker is, and there's one more level, which is a customer. The reason I haven't spent a lot of time on the seller's agency is because that almost every seller understands that if you want to hire a broker to list your house for sale, you got to sign the agreement that lays out all the terms, the price, how long it's going to be listed for. So it's very rare that a seller is represented without someone being their agent. So it's kind of like, we could talk about it, but it doesn't happen very often. So I mentioned the buyer because it's maybe 50% of the time buyers haven't previously been told the truth that, oh, you didn't have an agent, you had a transaction broker. Okay, so what's a transaction broker then? Well, I'm going to read directly from the state's language. A transaction broker assists the buyer or seller, or both, throughout a real estate transaction by performing terms of any written or oral agreement, fully informing the parties, presenting all offers, and assisting the parties with any contracts, including the closing of the transaction. Here's the important part: without being an agent or advocate for any of the parties. So same thing, you still have the disclosure requirements that you do. We have to disclose material known facts as a real estate broker that's licensed. Um, Here's the important part at the end. No written agreement is required. Again, if you didn't have a written agreement, you had a transaction broker and you didn't know it. And I'm sorry if I'm the bearer of bad news on that, but that's the reality. Now, the last one, and I think this is also important to understand, is a customer. So a customer is a party to a real estate transaction with whom the broker or the brokerage has no brokerage relationship, because such party has not engaged or employed the broker, either as the party's agent or as the party's transaction broker. So a great example, the most common example of someone being treated as a customer, is when you see a house listed for sale, or same for commercial, you see a property listed for sale or a space, commercial space available for rent, and you go ahead and contact the listing broker directly. You have no agent on your side. You work directly with the listing agent or broker, and they represent the best interest. They have the fiduciary duty to the seller, to the landlord. They don't have it to you, the buyer, and they can assist you through the transaction, and as long as it's disclosed, I don't have a concern about that. I don't have a problem with it as long as it's properly disclosed, which, by the way, is required under Colorado's real estate practices and laws. If I'm going to help you buy this house or buy this commercial property, and I represent the seller as their agent, I have you sign a form that acknowledges that you understand these definitions and that you are a customer. So no one ever comes back to blame us and say, oh, geez, I thought you were representing me. It's very clear from the beginning if it's done right. And so I don't have a problem with it, but I think where I want to make sure people have a clear understanding. When you go directly to the listing broker, they are usually representing the best interest of that seller, and that means they are negotiating against you. And in my professional opinion, I don't think it's wise unless you are very familiar with the market and very skilled at negotiations and understand the real estate contracts and transaction process. I wouldn't recommend doing it, but you certainly can. It's a free country and you're welcome to do it. And if you want to call me on one of my listings, I'd be happy to assist you, but you will know up front how I'm representing the seller and how I'm representing you. So guys, I hope this was really informative. I hope you can put this to use, and if we have a chance to help you with a real estate transaction, whether it's commercial or residential, whether that's in Southwest Colorado or that's in Metro Denver, we'd love the opportunity to be of service to you guys.